Hello, welcome to this video. This is the video looking at the poem Phrasebook by Shapcott. It's part of the conflict section in the poetry anthology Towards a World Unknown. Now, if you come across this video, chances are you are studying for your GCSE next year, which will be the OCR exam board that you'll be looking at. The OCR exam board have chosen this collection of poems to represent something about conflict in over a variety of generations and even centuries. And we're moving now into the very modern poems, and this poem will read very differently to the other poems that we've read before. It doesn't automatically make sense. It evades a simple narrative. So I think that's the first thing we need to say about this poem, Phrasebook, is that it's going to evade a simple narrative that we can give for this poem. I think that we are obsessed with simple narratives in our day and age. We want to make everything black and white and simple, but actually in this poem it shows us that when war is at play, everything is far from simple. So I think that if you do struggle to understand this poem, hang on and we'll try and get some of the difficult to understand vocab clarified soon. So it's called Phrasebook, and that is a very clever name for this poem. A phrasebook helps you piece together enough understanding of language. And I think this idea of enough understanding or enough of something to be able to piece together a coherent meaning is a really important message in this poem, because in it we've got lots of different phrases that we might not necessarily understand. The phrasebook in question is based on this 1960s phrasebook to help people speak English. So the phrases that come up again and again through this poem have been almost plucked out, I think chosen quite well, but they've been plucked out of a 1960s phrasebook. And so they're very simple phrases, they're very simple sentences that she repeats again and again throughout this poem. And it's almost a metaphor for being able to piece together parts of your own identity and your own understanding of the world. Although you don't have a full coherent picture of it, you have enough to be able to piece together and make sense. So you have to hold on to that idea throughout this poem, because I think that she doesn't tell you everything in this poem. She doesn't give you all the pieces of the puzzle. You've got to do a lot of piecing together. Just like if you were listening to someone trying to speak English, you have to piece it together and make sense of it. Okay, that's quite characteristic of modern poems. You have to do a lot of the work yourself. You have to piece together what's going on, rather than everything being simple and laid out for you in a lovely, beautiful narrative. In short, then, the narrative of this poem, because there is a slight story behind it, but it's not obvious. But just to get you started, the narrative is an English woman who is watching the Gulf War. We'll say a bit more about that in a second. The Gulf War on TV in her front room. Now she's watching the conflict unfold. Interestingly, the Gulf War was one of the first conflicts that was, readily available for you to watch on your TV. If you were alive back in 1991, you could have watched scenes and footage of this on the news, and it wasn't really happening before that. So she's watching the scenes from a faraway country. We know the country because we've already come across this conflict context before, which was Iraq invading Kuwait and the allied countries pushing the Iraqi army back in order to defend the country that they were trying to occupy, Kuwait. So we already know a little bit about the context here. And so this woman is watching these scenes from the Gulf War on her TV room, and they trigger memories of love. And she begins thinking about this concept of love being distorted. Okay, so love becomes distorted. So that is a basic, very, very basic narrative of this poem phrase book. But you're going to need a lot of space for this poem because it's not simple to understand. At the top here, I've got a glossary of terms because I think this is a really clever title for this poem, phrase book, because you're going to need a little phrase book yourself of the terms that come out of this poem that we don't really know much about. So I'm going to jot them down really quickly here, and you can go through and you can pause this video and you can, or if you already know them, just skip this part of the video, that's fine. But very, very simply then, these are all military terms that have been given acronyms so that probably they're a little bit more secretive, but also so that fighters and pilots remember them better. So they're all acronyms, or they are sort of slang or euphemisms for something else, for something a bit more serious, okay? So the first one then we hear is this word bliss. Now, bliss makes you think about something relaxing and pleasant, maybe going to a spa or something like that. But actually, military terminology, it stands for, and it's told in the poem, actually, it's in the poem just down at the bottom of the page. It stands for blend. It stands for low silhouette. It stands for irregular shape, small and secluded. So if you look at the capitals B-L-I-S-S, it spells out the word bliss. Now, this is a military acronym to help pilots remember how to evade enemy radar. So although it seems like it's going to be about something pleasant, it's actually something that's conflict-based. Okay, so remember that idea of love becoming distorted. SLAR is in the poem as well, side-looking airborne radar, side-looking airborne radar. And it's all about the military radar that the pilots use to spot things. So I guess it's kind of like the opposite of bliss. This, they're trying to evade the enemy radar, and this is their own radar. I'm not an army expert, but this is what I've found out. J stars is about surveillance. So that stands for Joint Surveillance Target Radar System. Like I said, if you've already found this out and you want to skip this bit, it's not very interesting. And it's actually not that important to the poem that you know these things. But this is the build-up of really foreign, strange, technical language that she's just going to pepper her poem with to try and make you feel like you are a foreign person in a foreign country, or a British person in a foreign country rather, trying to piece together fragments of language that you understand. So this is why she's peppering her poem with these unusual, unfamiliar acronyms. A kill box is a target area for weapons fire. Do you want to know where I got these from? I went to her blog. I went to Jo Shapcott's blog, and she's got a glossary there of the terms that she uses. But it's worth saying that perhaps a lot of these would have been on the news at the time. And we'll have a little think about context in a second. Target area for weapons fire. stealthed, cleansed, taken out. This one might be a bit more familiar to you if you've watched anything like the Jason Bourne series. If they say they're going to take somebody out, they're not taking them to Cafe Rouge, they're going to kill them. So these are all slang terms for killing people, euphemisms. Okay, so cleansed, again, you think it's going to be something quite pleasant, but it's actually not. It's something that has been distorted for a sort of deeply sinister purpose. Pinpoint accuracy. So this refers to some military maneuvers where they can, the enemy target was trying to pinpoint, sorry, the American fighters were trying to pinpoint the targets they were looking to kill. So rather than blowing up a massive building and taking out loads of civilians, they thought that they could use this pinpoint accuracy of the missiles and the guns loaded onto their aeroplanes. And it's talking about, obviously, we know this one. This is obviously the precise aim of targets. So it can aim and only kill that person. It's worth saying that in 1991, the claims for pinpoint accuracy for this were overrated. You know, they couldn't really kill people with pinpoint accuracy. Casualties, civilians did end up dying as a result of the conflict. And then the final one, and this is the last one, sorry, this has been a bit boring, high-speed anti-radiation missiles. Harms. Again, if you harm yourself, you sound like you've just kind of bumped into a wall and grazed your knee. Oh, I'm just a little bit hurt. I've harmed myself. But these high-speed anti-radiation missiles, to say it's harming someone is a bit of an anticlimax. It's unexpected. It's actually about killing people again. So it's worth saying here that this glossary of terms is Shapcott's way of almost making you feel uncomfortable, or perhaps that your language, your grasp of the English language is not quite enough. It's not quite enough to know exactly what she's talking about here. And so it's that discomfort, that uneasy feeling that she's banking on. That's why she's included it in her poem, all of these crazy glossary terms. We haven't even got onto the poem yet. That's how kind of reduced and difficult this poem is to understand. So we've said already that we've got the Gulf War conflict. It's worth saying as well that I've photocopied this poem so that it's a little bit easier for me to annotate for you, that I'm not like flicking back and forth, but you can do that as well. You can create a little flap for your poem so that you've got extra space to write on, because it's quite a dense, difficult to understand poem. So this poem was written around 1991, 92, and it was in the middle of this military maneuver, which was Desert Storm Operation, or Operation Desert Storm, as it was known. Okay, so this was a televised, as we've said already, televised war. The woman is watching it, like lots of people watching from their TV screens, and they're not really there in the action. They're not that really there, but they kind of feel like they're there. And it goes back to that part, that what I was saying at the start. You're not there in the action, but you know enough to be able to piece things together. Just like the people who are trying to learn English to piece things together. They're not really, they can't really speak English properly, fluently, absolutely, with amazing finesse and flair, but they can piece together enough to get a clear picture of what's going on. Okay, so it's deliberately written in this stream of consciousness style where one thought seems to collide with the other. I want you to imagine it like a stream or like a river, or maybe even sometimes like a tidal wave, just completely bombarding you. As you're trying to piece this together, you just get more and more fragmented and distorted information. So one thought seems to lead to another, and the whole thing is fragmented. This is a perfect word to use for this poem. It's a fragmented narrative. I said at the start, it's not a simple narrative. It's things happen in this poem where you just think, where's she got that from? Why is she talking about that now? I don't understand. So we can see actually, we're talking and we're making some notes about the form of this poem, which I do usually do on top. I know, but I've done it here today because this is where my space is. The form of the poem looks visually quite coherent. What is it? 9 stanzas, all of 4 lines. And so it looks like it might be quite a orthodox, conventional poem. It looks quite conventional. But actually, when you start reading it, you realize that there is no rhyme. There is no real rhythm to this poem at all. Sorry, I just had like a little mind blank there. So there's no rhyme, there's no rhythm to this poem, although it looks visually quite coherent. When you actually read it, you realize it is quite an unconventional in style. So what else can we say about this poem before we actually get into it? Now, the thoughts, as we said here, the thoughts seem to lead to another. It's fragmented. The thoughts collide with each other. And this brings me to another quotation, which I think I've just about got room for down here at the bottom, that I got from Jo's blog. And I'm paraphrasing here. This is what she says. This is her comment on the poem. It's worth reading it because it's an interesting blog post and not very long at all. This is what she says: is human love possible in a world where war exists? And she sort of, and this is the question that she's seeking to address in this poem phrase book. And it seems a weird question to be asking on a poem based on war, but this is a quotation from her own blog. It would be worth learning. Because it does tell you a little bit about what she is actually focused on here. She's not really focused on trying to teach someone English from a phrase book. She is kind of focused on the Gulf War, but it's almost like a springboard into something else, okay? She's also asking a lot of questions about reality and identity. She's also asking questions about language and the limitations of language. And she's also asking questions about human experience. So those are the 3 things that I'm going to try and pull out of this poem as we run it through. I want you to look for, as we're reading, her own voice in the poem, or the voice of whichever woman she's talking about here. Whoever's standing in the front room looking at the TV. That's the first voice. The second voice is this 1960s phrase book. And the third voice we're going to find is this glossary of pilot phrasing, a different kind of voice altogether. It could be from the TV itself. It could be what she's hearing being reported by journalists. It could be pilot language that she's picked up from other sources. So I want you to try and find those 3 phrases, 3 voices, sorry, in this poem: the English woman, the phrase book, and the glossary terms that we've looked at. Let's read it through together. I'm standing here inside my skin, which will do for a human remains pouch for the moment. Look down there, up here, quickly, slowly. This is my front room, where I'm lost in the action, live from a war on screen. I'm an Englishwoman. I don't understand you. What's the matter? You are right, you are wrong. Things are going well, badly. Am I disturbing you? TV is showing bliss as taught to pilots. Blend, low silhouette, irregular shape, small, secluded. Please write it down. Please speak slowly. Bliss is how it was in this very room. Over the page. When I raised my body to his mouth, when he even balanced me in the air. Or at least I thought so. And yes, the pilots say yes, they have caught it through the side-looking airborne radar and through the J-stars. I'm expecting a gentleman, a young gentleman, two gentlemen, some gentlemen. Please send him, them, up at once. This is really beautiful. Yes, they have seen us. The pilots in the kill box on their screens and played the routine for getting us stealthed, that is, cleansed to you and me, taken out. They know how to move into a single room like that, to send in with pinpoint accuracy 100 harms. I have 2 cases in a cardboard box. There is another bag there. I cannot open my case. Look out, the lock is broken. Have I done enough? Bliss, the pilots say, is for evasion and escape. What is love in all this debris? Just one person pounding another into dust, into dust. Where is the British consulate? Please explain. What does it mean? What must I do? Where can I find? What have I done? I have done nothing. Let me pass, please. I'm an Englishwoman. So hopefully the poem makes a little bit more sense now that we've looked at the extremely complex context behind it. I'm not going to go through everything in this poem because this video is too long already and you are going to find it difficult. But it's worth, like Emily Dickinson does in There's a Certain Slant of Light, just having it playing around in your head for a little while and trying to piece together your own understanding of it. This first metaphor here that we can look at, my skin is a human remains pouch. It's not a perfect human remains pouch, which actually means a body bag. She's saying that her skin itself is her body bag, likening herself to the people who have died in the Gulf War action. You know, they would fly the soldiers over to the Gulf War and many wars, not just the Gulf War, but they would also fly body bags just in case those people, you know, died in action. Imagine flying in the same plane as a load of body bags, knowing that your body could be physically coming back in a body bag after you've died. So she seems to feel pulled into this moment on the screen. Then we've got these phrases from the phrase book that are just kind of seeping into the narrative here. Look down there, up here, quickly, slowly. Front room, this is my front room, where I'm lost in the action. Now, I would say here we've got a lot of antithesis. When we see antithesis, we know that there's a connection between love and hate, or love and conflict as it is here. There's a conflict between these things. Look down, look up, quickly, slowly. She's in her front room, but in the action as well. Okay, so this is quite symbolic because what we said was she's trying to deal with the question down here, is love possible in a world where war exists? So it makes sense in a way to have this antithesis in the first stanza. And again, she doesn't really know what else to say. She's heard these phrases before. I'm an Englishwoman. I don't understand you. What's the matter? You are right. You are wrong. Again, we've got this antithetical phrasing here. Things are going well, badly. And it sounds like she's just trying to piece together meaning. So perhaps we've got this phrasing from the phrase book here. In a way, Shapcott is trying to sympathize with sort of non-English speakers, because it's how she feels when she's reading the news and watching the news with all this jargon going on. Human remains pouch. And then we've got down here talking about bliss. She thinks she knows what it is, but she doesn't actually. Okay, so that's another idea there, that language can can be distorted. You know, if the word bliss can be distorted, then perhaps the meaning of the word love can be distorted as well, because here she thinks she knows what bliss means, but actually she's been told blend, low silhouette, irregular shape, small, secluded, what we talked about in the phrasing at the top of the page. And again, she's sympathetic with these people who are struggling to understand English and they need a phrase book because she feels like she's not very empowered to understand what this language is all about, these military terms. Bliss is how it was in this very room. Now, this is where the stream of consciousness comes in here, because she has immediately, this idea of bliss, even though it's talking about evading enemy radar, it makes her, it kind of almost triggers the memory of some kind of erotic experience that she was having in that room. Now, the writer in the Jo Shapcott, in her blog, she says that it's not even a real, it might not even be a real experience that she's had, but I kind of feel like it sounds like it is here. She talks about it in very kind of explicit language. She's saying, look, this is my understanding of the word bliss. I raised my body to his mouth when he even balanced me in the air. They've got a dual meaning in this phrase here that I think is really important to get out. I didn't notice this at all at first. And then someone I was speaking to said, well, this is almost like extending the piloting metaphor. So planes sort of balance in the air, but it's also combined with the cliche, you know, I was walking on air, I was in love, I was, you know, floating on air. So it's a piloting metaphor combined with the cliche about love, you know, being like you're walking on air, or at least I thought so. And yes, the pilots say, yes, they've caught it through the side-looking airborne radar. Again, her memory has been interrupted again while the TV vies, it's like vying for her attention. So she's thinking about this wonderful love experience, but she almost feels guilty. The TV has invaded her mindset here. And that triggers some paranoia. So it's invading her mind. That's going to trigger, as I've just said, some paranoia. So when she starts to kind of, I would almost call this like glitching here. You know, when your computer glitches and it does something weird, and sometimes you can't quite find a word that you mean, and so you sort of your language glitches. I'm expecting a gentleman, a young gentleman, two gentlemen, some gentlemen. Please send him, them up at once. This is really beautiful. There's almost something like she's glitching here, like she's trying to distract herself. But she's got this thought in her mind that she is being spied on, because the J stars, remember, is all about surveillance. It's all about that idea that the enemy are watching us, someone's spying on me. And if they can spy on enemies in the Middle East, they can spy on me in my front room while I'm having this love experience, which is something a little bit disconcerting. Yes, they have seen us, the pilots in the kill box, so they're looking at us. These pilots, they might, they're fine, they're on the war TV, but what's to stop them from looking from their screens at us in our, on our screen, our TV screen? It's a bit of a funny kind of, we could laugh at this, it sounds a bit childish here, but she's paranoid that they're going to be stealthed, cleansed, and taken out in their sitting room while they are enjoying this romantic experience together. This is what she's paranoid about. So I'll make that note here, because it's a paranoia about kind of surveillance. It's a paranoia about sort of a lack of privacy. And she thinks she's going to have to get ready to run because she's heard that they can use this pinpoint accuracy to target the enemy. And 100 harms. I have 2 cases and a cardboard box. There's another bag there. I cannot open my case. Look out, the lock is broken. Have I done enough? So it brings in another dilemma that she has here. It's almost like she has to run away. Does she run? Is this something about like forced migration? Don't forget, with war comes a lot of refugees. With war comes a lot of asylum seekers, people being driven out of their homelands because they don't belong or they feel like they have to take shelter in neighbouring peaceful countries. And so it gets her thinking about someone running away with 2 cases, a cardboard box, bags, and then she has this worry because even if she does manage to get away, she doesn't feel like she's done enough to escape. It comes back then. See how fragmented this is. She hasn't finished this idea, but already something else is triggered in her head and brought her into a different memory. Bliss, the pilots say, is for evasion and escape. What's love in all this debris? So not only does the word bliss make the pilots remember how to evade, the word bliss also acts in that metaphorical way to evade a true meaning of love. And to make this even more explicit, we've had a bit of an explicit reference up here at the start of the poem here about raised my body to his mouth, he balanced me in the air, but she's going to come back to it here as well. So, you know, hold on tight and get ready for this one. What's love in all this debris? So she's talking again about love and conflict. How can they exist together? She's juxtaposed it, because it shouldn't be that 2 people can be in love in one part of the world and that some people can be killing others in another part of the world, because actually that's what it is when it says this, pounding one person, pounding another into dust, into dust. You know, when your body turns to dust, this is like decay, dying. But what else does it sound like here? Because it immediately follows this question about love. Well, it sounds to me like a very painful experience of sex, maybe even abuse. I'm not saying that this poem is about abuse, I don't think it is, but she has taken away the love of sex here and she's just replaced it with a violence, with a pain, and with something that is actually could be quite abusive. One person pounding another into dust. So again, it's that idea, isn't it, that sex and love can be distorted and they can in fact mean different things. I do not know the word for it yet, and I think that's an interesting little phrase there. It comes back to the point that we made, that language is sometimes incomplete, that it doesn't quite give enough information to be able to make sense. I don't know if that in fact even made sense. This poem is kind of not really making sense, I guess. But language is somehow incomplete. It doesn't quite do enough of a good enough job to be able to summarize what she means here. I do not know the word for it yet. And that's just a kind of tacked on phrase that you could learn and say to in any language, couldn't you? You know, what do you mean? I don't know the word for it yet. So we come to that stanza here. Where is the British consulate? Please explain. What does it mean? What must I do? Where can I find? What have I done? I've done nothing. Let me pass, please. I'm an English woman. And I think in the end, the language is broken and sort of reduced to non-communicative phrasing, because if you're talking in a, you know, how many rhetorical questions does she have here? British consonant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you're going to talk and you're going to repeat 5 rhetorical questions in a row, you're not really having a dialogue with anybody. You're just panicking. And so there's almost this sense of panic here because she's turned up to a British consulate. Who knows where this is? She's maybe even imagining someone has turned up to like an embassy. This is a little piece of home in a faraway country. And she expects that perhaps if she reveals her identity as an English woman, that she'll be taken seriously as unprotected, maybe. So this is the last thing. This is the last phrase here, the last sentence. And I think we can all understand that this is the last thing that she can say that she knows for a certainty makes sense. The rest of the poem is fragmented. It's tangential. It bounces around all over the place. But actually, the final phrase, sentence, I understand perfectly well. You know, she wants to get into the embassy. She's an English woman. She needs protection. So this poem phrase book, if you manage to piece together some of the messages from this poem, you've done really well. It's a super challenging poem. I'm going to very quickly, and well done if you've made it this far, by the way. I'm going to very, very quickly, because I've got a tiny bit of space down here, and I cheated because I photocopied it. I'm going to just write down some of the main key messages that I think are coming out of this poem phrase book. Did you like the poem? Did you think it was crazy? Did you understand it? Drop me a message. So I think that reality, she's saying here, reality is how you phrase it. She's imagining not knowing fully how to speak English. Well, how can you communicate fully with someone if you don't know? You only know those phrases enough to be able to communicate them. So reality is in how it's phrased. This ties to the war she's watching. She's hearing it all secondhand. She's watching it all secondhand. And on top of that, there is a language barrier. It's in English, but there's so many terminology uses that are just thrown in there that are not explained. She feels like she's watching it through a barrier, okay? So reality is how you phrase it. That's the first key message of this poem. The second key message of this poem is that language allows you to access another culture. Okay, but, and this is a big but here, like I said, sometimes it's enough, but sometimes it fails. You know, sometimes we do not have the words to be able to accurately communicate what we mean. So this is the second big message in this poem. And I think thirdly, by the fact that she keeps tying her strange love memories into the conflict, she's making the point that human experiences are connected. I think that's enough for today. But I think that you could really do with reading it through for yourself another couple of times and finding your way over to Jo Shapcott's blog, because she does offer some other good answers to questions that students have asked her over the years. Okay, thank you. If you made it to the end of this video, well done. You've worked really hard. Okay.